Hi, friends. Welcome to the Regenerative Agriculture Podcast. I really enjoy the conversations I have here exploring all the topics related to human health and soil health and what regenerative agriculture should be, what we should aspire to, what we can learn from each other, and the opportunity that we have to be good stewards of the landscape, of ecosystems of this planet, and improve its overall function and performance for the pieces and parts that we interact with. I've really been looking forward to having a conversation with Gavin Heywood from Australia ever since I heard about his operation and the work that he's doing a couple of years or a couple of months ago when I met a friend and a colleague at RFSI. Gavin, I don't want to spoil the surprise by pretending I know very much about your operation. I know you're doing several things that are quite unusual and out of the ordinary. So, can you tell us a little bit about your operation, your history, your journey? What's the scope of the work that you're working on today, and how did you arrive here?
Thank you, John, for having me today. It's a great honour to be here and to tell our story. Uh, so we're in Australia, in New South Wales. We have a family farm, which we've been on for 120 years, and we run a business that sells animal blood. And so this is the point where my kids all start rolling their eyes because they've heard people ask this question so many times, and they all switch off. And we run up to 250 horses in one mob in a time-controlled grazing fashion. We also have a large mob of sheep and a handful of cattle, and we sell blood into the medical diagnostic market to make blood agar plates for hospital microbiology labs. We sell blood and serum and plasma to university labs for teaching and for research, and to commercial labs for all sorts of weird and wonderful uh, testing and research as well. And we've been making a little bit of snake antibodies in horses. And yeah, that's it's we've been at it for 20 years, and the idea came from someone. I used to work in a laboratory at New South Wales Uni, and after I'd completed uni, as I was leaving, someone said, "Oh, well, you should sell goat serum to us." And so I thought, "Oh, that sounds like a great way of making lots of money." So I came home, and my gross margins on my theoretical goat serum business looked really good, and I caught a heap of feral goats. Got permission to do it from the Animal Ethics Committee, and started to try and sell goat serum and failed. We didn't really sell more than 10 liters even to this day, but it started in process. I got a grant from the government to market the goat serum, and through that grant, put a website up. We found another business that was going out of fashion, not out of fashion, out of business. Another blood business, and bought their tools and put their name as a keyword uh, in the search engine for our website. And away we went. People started finding us, and we started making little products, and it was like a little hobby for about 7 years. And finally, the big users of horse blood found us and tested us out with small products, and um, finally became a regular buyer every week, which took in. So we started that in 2004. By the end of 2010, we actually could build a business, could build a shed for the business, employ 4 people, and start regularly putting blood out. So it was a long process, and uh, up until that time, I was working for my dad on the farm for not a lot of money, and we've gradually built that business up and up so that it's become um, the biggest supplier of horse and sheep blood in Australia. And we also sell overseas to to other government institutions and businesses in the Pacific and Southeast Asia as well.
You mentioned providing blood and providing serum for all kinds of weird and wonderful projects. But I imagine to many people generally, and to many farmers in particular, your operation sounds pretty weird and wonderful in and of itself.
Yeah, it is. It is. We to start off with, John, we are, we're trying to do our grazing and farming holistically for a start. So that's already marks us out as weirdos to everyone around a boundary, because our farm looks bushier, and you know, it's got so much more diversity. We let weeds grow that other people would not want. We let If trees or limbs fall down, we leave them there because they become great habitat for the next lot of trees to come up. Like there's so many things about our place that are already weird, and then to put.
So I haven't even seen it yet, but you're saying it looks messy to people who want everything cleaned up.
Oh yes, yeah. People like to bulldoze things into a pile and burn it so that it looks like a park, and that just takes habitat away from so many things, from microbes up to lizards and snakes and things. So I love the messiness because it creates little microclimates everywhere. And um, well, for example, I saw a tree that had fallen down recently, and it had 60 new trees growing all around it. 60 uh, saplings, and of about 12 different species that it was feeding them all. So um, why would you get rid of them? So
Yep.
that's weird, because people would normally burn that log, and none of those trees would have grown.
Yep.
Um, yeah,
You know,
so
one of the pieces that I'm really fascinated or intrigued about your story is doing something that is so out of the ordinary and so remarkably different. Um, there, I very frequently have conversations with farmers who feel stuck, who feel trapped, as if though they can't do something different. They are stuck because of infrastructure investments or because of what they are comfortable or familiar with. What are the things that you've observed, or what have you experienced that has given you comfort trying to do different things, something that's very different and out of the ordinary, and being perceived as farming weird by all the people around you?
well, in terms of the regenerative and the holistic way of doing it, I was very blessed in that I went away to university and didn't study agriculture. And when I came back, my dad had already started his holistic journey a few years earlier by doing holistic management training and then grazing for profit, or similar to your ranching for profit. And as soon as I got home, he and I went and did another grazing for profit course. So that was my foundation, and I didn't have any conventional ideas in my head, and that was very useful, because even though my dad was trying to change, he still had all the old ways in his head that he knew worked, and stepping out into a new way was restrictive, because he was running the farm for the family, and the risk of failure in his mind was always weighing on him. um, so maybe at the start I didn't have any money invested in land. I could try things, and that was helpful. uh, in terms of the blood business, we nearly gave up many times. It took 7 or 8 years to actually get to the point where we could pay ourselves a salary, and it was just a hobby up until that point. And I think I was just pig-headed about it, because there was obviously a market, and we just had to prove ourselves to be worthy of getting a foot in the door in the market. I think I was convinced that if we had healthy land, we would have a healthy blood product, and we could do it. I don't know if it was naive, because there was a lot of hard work involved, and sometimes staying up all night filtering serum, or dealing with dealing with blood products that needed to be done because it's a perishable thing. So we put a lot of hard work in, and maybe there were times when it would have been prudent to stop. But uh, I don't know. I just had a dream that I was just going to keep pushing until it worked. In terms of regenerative stuff, if you read Charlie Massey's Call of the Reed Warbler, some of the stories in that where farmers, graziers um, have really hit a wall in their own land, but walk over the fence and see the what's growing on the verge beside their road, and seeing how it's not suffering at all in under the same rainfall. Things like that really encourage me that if we take our foot off nature's neck and let it do what it can do, then there are so many things possible. And so,
Yep.
I think if people in the Chihuahuan Desert can grow good grass, we
Yep.
have more rain than them.
Yeah.
Well, we can do it as well.
Yeah. Can you, well, there's several questions that I want to ask you, but can you give us some context on the rainfall in your environment?
So we have 625 mils
Okay.
of rain on average. What's
Yeah.
that? 25 inches,
23, 25 inches, something like that. Yeah.
and it's sort of fairly. It's maybe a tiny bit more summer dominant, but we can get good rain in the winter as well, and we can grow good legume content during the winter, and ryegrass and oats and that sort of stuff, and are getting more winter active native grasses coming back in as well.
Yeah.
Um, yep.
Now, you mentioned a phrase a bit ago that I'd love to get into and see if there's something there. And you mentioned producing a healthy blood product. And what defines a healthy blood product? And are there any opportunities for improvement there? There's a few thoughts that come to mind. One is William Albrecht here, who was one of the pioneering soil scientists who really innovated a lot of the soil science and the soil chemistry work that has been the foundations of eco agriculture for quite some time. After the Second World War, or yeah, I think it was shortly after the Second World War, he obtained all of the uh, fitness. He overlaid the fitness for military service from all the draftees and overlaid them with soil geological profiles. And he was able to show very distinctly and very clearly that there were certain soil types that had higher calcium content, that had better mineral nutrition, better mineral balance, that had a much smaller percentage of young men being rejected for physical reasons, for physical fitness reasons, than other soils that were more minerally depleted. And when I think about producing blood, I mean, I don't know how much blood you were harvesting from an animal in a given time period, but that is constantly generating new blood cells um, is a process that can take some energy, or that I could perceive as possibly being energy or nutrient depleting. And that's an assumption on my part that might not be correct. But just love to, what defines a healthy blood product versus a less healthy blood product, and how are you managing that?
It's pretty simple. We're not doing biochemical or even mineral analysis of the blood, but our main marker is the percentage of red blood cells that a horse has. So if it's sort of 30% red blood cells or less, then it's regarded as anemic. And we are strictly guided by an animal care and ethics committee who we report to. And but it seems, and it was really stark for us back in 2019 when it was really, really dry here. We got down to nearly only a third of our rainfall for a 12-month period, and we full fed those 250 horses for 11 months with all their food. Just brought them into 10 hectares and gave them everything. And I've got a graph that shows their weight and their red blood cell percentage for the months leading up to that, and it was diving down, down, down towards 30% red blood cell percentage. But uh, and I started trying to feed them cheaply because I knew it was going to cost a lot of money. And I ended up getting a horse nutritionist in, and she said, "No, you can't do that. You can't roll barley and feed it to them. You shouldn't be giving them that hay. You need to be giving them lucerne hay, and they need to be getting this many kilos per kilo of body weight, etc." And as soon as we fixed, it was mostly the protein content, I think, of the feed up. Their weights, the graph shows it so starkly. Their weights and their red blood cells just took off to a new level, and instead of being down around 30%, the average was up over 40%, which is that's pretty hard to keep an average up there. Even you'd have to have a really good grass season to do that, but it really seems to be dependent on the quality of the protein in the grass, and so obviously that can be driven by the minerals in the soil. But it is interesting, even on the farm that we're running these horses on, it's really impoverished from lots and lots of disc ploughing over 50 or 60 years to grow wheat. And it's still able to keep, when there's enough moisture and enough grass, if we give the grass a good recovery time, it's still able to keep red blood cell percentage up in the high 30s, low 40s. So um, I wondered, John, whether that's because when I buy the animals, they're already 5 to 10 years old and they've done all their growing. Maybe if we had to grow them on this land, they'd end up like those soldiers that got rejected.
Yep.
I think from memory that his research showed that they had, their teeth were poor and things like that. They weren't
Their
grown the
teeth were
same
poor,
as,
they were
um,
flat-footed, they didn't have
yeah.
they were really looking amongst other things, particularly at leg and foot architecture to be able to march for long distances and be resilient in stressful environments in that regard.
So I'm wondering whether the horses, because they're mostly ex harness racing horses, so they've been bred to race, and they would be fed to the
Right.
eyeballs for their first 4 or 5 years of their life, and maybe that's the thing that then enables them to exist on my poorer land. That's possibly true. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that you're describing the very challenging land conditions that you have, and I think it might have been before we had the microphone turned on, but you're also relatively small scale for the region that you're in, if I remember correctly.
Uh, the
Or
whole
I guess the question that I'm really asking is, or trying to understand is, it seems to me with a blood business, you have the opportunity to actually make a livelihood, and a good livelihood on a scale that might be smaller than some might consider.
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
If I was running cattle on this land, I'd have to have a job somewhere else. Even if I was running uh, a wool grow. I couldn't do a fat lamb operation on this land, and I could breed cattle on here. I could maybe run 150 to 200 cows, but you wouldn't be able to grow their calves out on this land. You'd have to take them somewhere else, and um, it wouldn't support a family. So we at least 1,800 acres, and we also own another 4,500 acres, which adjoins that land. And it's also had a similar history in terms of overstocking and cropping and the type of ploughing and stuff. But it seems softer down there. I think it's been managed more kindly for a lot of that time, and it's regenerating really fast. We've changed the management down there in the last uh, 5 years, and it's got trees popping up. It's got different good pastures starting to appear, and it will actually do a better job when we are going to move our operation down there too.
One of the things that I wanted to ask you about is how you manage grazing horses and um, how you manage them to have a holistic and a kind impact on the landscape. I'm a part of a community that still farms with horses, and we still drive horses. They're our primary means of transportation locally. And horses, um, a lot of people have small lots or small homesteads, and they might have one or two horses on a homestead of half a dozen acres. And those horses impact their pastures very negatively because they're there constantly all the time. And so these pastures are often continuously grazed. And when you have high rainfall environments during the winter months, they just get pounded and they get hammered. And so we're starting to have these conversations about as a community about, okay, how do we need to begin managing our horses and our horse pasture differently, particularly during the winter months, but just to avoid the continuous grazing, because unlike a grazing cow, perhaps a bit more like a sheep, they can bite a grass or plant off all the way down right to the soil. Um, so how what have you learned with, and how are you grazing your horses, and what are you observing? What have you been learning?
So really, you're still trying to graze them the same way as a mob of cattle, uh, except the amount of time you might leave them in a paddock might end up being less because certainly they have bottom and top teeth, so they can, like you say, bite things off. It still comes down to time. So if you're only trying to take the top 40 or 50% of the plant so that its roots don't stop growing and keep oozing out that sugar which we really need, uh, you can still get it, and they're still trampling things. They have hooves that really can cut and chip, and I think they're a really good animal for breaking new ground, but also smashing down moribund uh, grass and weeds. But if you just have to manage the time. So if you leave them in there for less time and move them on and let that plant recover, you're still going to get a good result. On a small holding, that's really difficult. And I mean, you can
Yeah.
be fencing small paddocks. If for two horses, you wouldn't need much. You would only need,
Well, the
a
challenge is if
yard.
you yeah, the challenge is if you constrict them that much from a feeding perspective, then they don't really get enough exercise.
That's difficult, and I don't know. I don't know how you would do that. Un-
You pool
Unless,
pastures with your neighbors.
well, I guess so. Um, yeah, or exercise them, take them for a walk
Yeah,
like you would your dog. Mm. But yeah,
yeah,
if you can control the time, you can control what the outcome, and that's always the way in with any grazing animal, I think. But I view them as a massive chisel plow, mulcher. That they can do a lot of good in a paddock, really open it up for new growth to come. But they can also really bite everything down to the if you leave them in there for half a day too much, you know it. They
yeah,
take too much. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so you've been on this holistic ranching for profit journey for quite some time. What have been, as you've observed, you described that the soil was very degraded historically. What have been some of the um, what's been the improvement? What's been the progression in the ecosystem that you've observed? What have been some of the memorable moments for you?
I think one of the early things was seeing water not lie on the ground but actually soak in, and there are a whole heap of monitoring tools you can use to uh, to get numbers on this, and I do have those tools, and I seem to never make the time to use them. But water soaking in, more plant basal density, so plants being closer together, less bare soil. We've seen scalded patches of soil that'll have a ring of thistles around them, and that ring of thistles will slowly uh, come creep in until that patch of bare soil disappears. We've had that happening over the time. We've had lots of trees pop up, especially with horses. Horses don't seem to eat all the little trees like sheep and
That's
cattle would,
interesting.
because they're only in there for a day normally. They don't seem to eat those trees, but when they get to about a foot width in the trunk, they might strip the bark off it. So it's a strange difference to cows. Cows would rub on them and smash them down and eat the leaves. Horses don't seem to do that as much. So I have a really beautiful little tree called a currajong, which grows on our land, and it's the sort of tree that was left by the settlers as a tree that would be a good shade tree and for cutting the leaves down in dry times for fodder because they've got good protein. They generally struggle to regenerate with sheep and cattle, but with the horses, they've been on the land I'm running my horses on. There's barely an adult Kurrajong tree, but in the last 14 years, the amount of Kurrajong seedlings that have sprouted up and gotten away has been really gobsmacking. So uh, I'm going to now take my horses down onto another piece of land and swap cows up to here, and I'm just hoping that they're big enough to survive them. Um, we've also had different grasses come in, so uh, instead of woody hard grasses, we've had softer grasses coming in, and uh, that's obviously been really good. And we also have had more um, diversity in terms of forbs and sort of taprooted weeds. Every now and again, we get a wave of thistles come through, and as much as I hate them because I get them in my legs and the horses get them in their eyes, they're doing amazing jobs opening soil up. But I would rather have a plant like a chicory or a milk thistle or a prickly lettuce or something do that. And we seem to be getting more of those sort of plants coming in. And the stock love them because they've got secondary metabolites that they like. And um, so diversity is another big change, I think.
One of the pieces that I find intriguing thinking about your story of the tree development, I don't know how densely your trees are returning, but it seems like you have you're creating the conditions for the redevelopment of a savanna, where you have a combination of a treed and a grassy landscape. And some time ago, I think it was shortly after it was printed, I read this fascinating book titled "The Greatest Estate on Earth," describing how the Aborigines managed Australia with fire and largely with fire as a tool, I think. And one of the highlights that really stood out in my mind was the description of how soft the soil was in certain regions that horses actually couldn't run across it because it was so soft, and the fact that Australia had no hoofed animals before the Europeans arrived. And so it's fascinating that you're able to use horses and their grazing habits as a tool to regenerate some of those landscapes.
It is, and actually, just thinking about the softness of the soil, where I run them, I still think it's an incredibly hard piece of land. It's like a light clay, a light brown sort of clay sort of soil with shale really not that far under in some places. But we've never really had to trim the hooves on the horses, except in the last 5 years, we've had to start doing that because I think it's just been softer and they're not chipping off and breaking off themselves. It's the only thing I can think of, and maybe it is softening up a little bit. Uh, just the surface. I mean, it would only take the top inch to soften up a little bit, I guess, and they wouldn't chip off. But it seems to me that's been something that's probably changed in the since the dry period from 2014 to the start of 2020. We've had 3 wet summers, and it's I think because we took the animals off the land for 2019, it's just responded in an amazing fashion. Yeah, and we're not, yeah, we're having to trim the horses' hooves now, and it's interesting.
Yeah, well, if you're trimming several hundred horses' hooves every couple of months, that's a chore. That's a job.
Wow, no, we're not doing that many, but we do sort of 30 to 40, every 3 months maybe. But we never used to do any before that. We did we didn't do them at all. But in terms of the savannah and the return of those trees, I think we use our animals a little bit like the cool burns are used in Gamage's book. So it's not quite the same because I have in some areas I have trouble with a native pine tree that just can grow up as thick as hair on a cat's back, and it's um, yeah, it's a real problem because it doesn't let anything grow underneath it. And I do we have talked about trying some cool burns in our hill country to try and um, yeah, to try and
To manage
get
those
rid of
trees
some
and
of that
reduce their
that
density a little bit?
because you can't do it with the horses won't do it. If you left sheep or goats in there for long enough, they would eat them, but then everything else would be
Yep,
degraded around it as well. So yeah, there are still some questions to be explored around that
yep.
though.
As you've been on this journey and working with the livestock and the landscape, what has surprised you? What was unexpected?
It's unexpected that we can actually run that many horses in a mob. We started with 20, and when we got bleeding properly, we put them into 60, and that was a big deal because we run them behind single wire electric fences, and they all came from places where they'd been in a stable all their life. So becoming a herd and being herded was new to them. And so they formed all these little groups and just ran in every direction. And they ran through my single wire electric fences. And um, over time, we formed them into a herd that moved as a herd. It had leaders and middle and tail. And um, then getting them into a bigger mob, so 120, that was the next step. And then at some point, we decided that we actually needed all our animals together in one mob. So we ended up with 250. There might have even been more than that at some point. That was a really big paradigm shift that we could run them that big and then draft them each week. And we only take a third out each week. It's been really surprising to me that they don't eat the trees as they come up, uh, but they will eat bark coming into the spring. Doesn't matter what other feed is around, they'll eat the bark off a certain tree. That's a nasty surprise because they can kill 100-year-old eucalypt overnight by stripping all the bark up to 3 meters around. So we have to do a bit of protection of some of those trees.
When we have cattle in larger groups, there's this known phenomena that beyond a certain threshold, they no longer behave as individuals. They start behaving as a group. They start behaving as a mob. Are you observing a similar phenomena with the horses as well?
My observation is that they actually don't like each other, but they can't not be where each other is. And so within my group, and this was probably another surprise, there and if you actually got to know your cows and sheep, you'd see this as well. That some of the horses have no friends and they just are on their own all the time and they're at the back of the mob. Some have one friend, there might be three or up to seven in a group, and they're all split into social groups like this. And so they ferociously look after that group. They will bite and kick and whatever it takes, barge to protect their little group from anyone else coming near them at the trough or going through a gate or whatever it is. Um, but as soon as as soon as a few of them go through a gate, all the rest have to charge through after them just because they're scared of missing out on something. They cannot not be in the mob.
Are we still talking about horses?
Yeah, this is what happens. So it's crazy. And if I run them up a laneway and try to cross a gully, the ones at the front, they will go to the edge and then they'll turn around and face the rest of the mob. And I have to keep pushing the tail enders up. So they're the ones getting my wrath. And as I start getting more and more cranky to try and move them and compress the mob enough to push the leaders through, the leaders will then start fighting and kicking each other because they're getting more pressure on them, and then eventually one of them will look around and go, "Oh, okay, we'll go across." And it's it's just crazy that I don't think they're much more intelligent than a kindergarten kid, like I think they're really simple. I know they can do lots of amazing things. You can teach them a lot of stuff, but I just observe really dumb behavior every day, and it's usually to do with trying to get to where your friend is, or getting away from someone who's protecting their friend. It's really frustrates the heck out of me, because they just can't slow down and think it through, or do it slowly like a cow would. They will just barge through a fence to get to where they need to go because I've just got to get there, and they don't. So they're a frustrating animal to work with at times, but they're also amazing to watch when they're all galloping along in a massive group, and when they're really feeling fit and healthy, they are full of energy and cavorting and kicking their back end up and neighing, and that's amazing to watch as well. I feel like when I see them doing that, it makes me glad that I'm running horses. uh, I don't think I'll miss them when they're gone because it'll be much easier.
So,
Yeah.
with the larger mob, are you still running a single wire?
Yes, so fairly early on, I learnt that painting the wire with white paint was pretty helpful, and I also paint the top of each post. My posts are probably 25 to 30 meters apart,
Oh,
and
quite some
the
distance.
the
Yeah.
wire is about a meter off the ground, and we paint the wire white, and that made a massive difference to them seeing it because sometimes the grass is that high, and sometimes there are other woody weeds that have grown that high, and at times I've had to slash with the tractor each side just so they can see the wire. Yeah, so it's the cheapest way to fence a place up. So I've probably got 110 paddocks for them, uh, sort of averaging 6 to 7 hectares, and yeah, when I run out of grass in that area for the rain we've had, I take them to another part of the property until it recovers. And uh, but I've also found that I've started using horse cider wire, which is like a poly wire that's white, which it stays bright white, even like a paint will gradually wear off, but this will stay white, and I can just pull it out through the post off a reel and make it really obvious where the fence is as well. So
Yep.
that makes a massive difference.
So, Gavin, a bit ago, you made some comment about thinking about when the horses are gone. So I don't know if this is something that you're considering or thinking about or not, but how do you envision your operation growing or evolving or shifting over time?
I think we'll still be doing this for quite a while, at least a decade, I would say. But I think eventually we would go to cattle with probably with sheep. Uh, our land's been used to grow wheat and other crops for a long time, but I don't think it's the best place to be doing that. So we will continue to grow cover crops, and the main reason for doing that is to continue to get all different types of plants pulling up different minerals, get different root systems in there with their attendant microbial communities to keep breaking the soil up. So I mentioned we have a soil carbon project. Uh, Everything will be driving towards getting my roots and microbes and carbon down to 1.20 meters or more uh, to store it, but also for all the other benefits that come with it. So using cattle to do that, using sheep to do that. We did used to grow a lot of merino wool, like garment quality wool. I, I don't think I would go back to that. That was my dad's passion. Um, but who knows? Maybe you could do that in a smaller way at some point. But at the moment, we're just building a new facility for the blood business, and we're about to expand, uh, especially our sheep bleeding production. We'll hopefully have to go from 200 to 800 or 1,000 sheep to provide the blood that we're going to need to do. So that's
You
going to
know,
be
I've been wanting to not just have a conversation about the blood business, because I'm really interested in understanding the rest of the operation as well. But I know my listeners are not going to be happy if I don't ask a little bit more about the blood. So, um, tell us a little bit about what does the process look like of drawing blood from an animal, and how much do you take? Can you take? How much can the amount that you take change based on the health of the animal? What does the process look like?
so we run to guidelines set by the Animal Ethics Committee, and they allow us to take 1% of the body weight of a horse. So a 500-kilo horse, you can take 5 liters. We take that uh, every 3 weeks. We would have that horse available,
Well,
and that would, if we don't have an order that is big enough that week to bleed all of the animals for that week, we don't bleed them all. But um, so we would run them in up a race, get them all prepared, put them in a special horse crush, and they're eating, so it's pretty good for them. So I guess it's like having a milkshake when you give blood yourself. They they just stand there, and we put a very big needle, which is attached to a long tube, into a 10-liter bag, and collect collect the blood. We weigh the blood so we know how much is in there, and uh, we have to defibrillate the blood, which means clot it, but without it becoming a big blob of jelly. We actually have to agitate it so that the fibrin, which forms the clot, forms a spongy clump, really, about as big as your fist. And then in our little lab, we can pour that blood out, and it's just red blood cells in serum, and that will stay liquid forever because the fibrin's gone now. And um, we pool that together in bags, which we then pour into bottles or bags for our customers. So, and it's the same process for a sheep, but 50-kilo sheep you could take 500 mils out of. So that's the same sort of thing. And or if we have to make plasma, then we would collect it into an anticoagulant that's already in the bag, and that would stop it from clotting. And you might sell it as whole blood that's not clotted, or you might get rid of the red blood cells and sell the plasma. Or if you let it clot and then get rid of the clot and the red blood cells, you'll have serum. So that's another product. So just depends what people ask for. Um, so we might send out 15 little boxes of blood all around to universities and companies, as well as all the big 40-liter eskies that we send each week out to all over the place for our bigger customers. Um, but yeah, and it all has to be the really cool thing, John, is that we are really trying to have a microbially healthy soil so that we can have healthy plants, healthy animals, the blood's good. And then when we collect the blood, it has to be perfectly sterile, and not even one bacteria or fungal spore or mold spore or anything can come from the when you put the needle in the animal to when it goes out to the customer, it has to be perfectly sterile. But the reason most of our blood is made is to make it into blood agar plates, which then grow microbes that are unhealthy ones. So that's that's the really cool overarching progression of our product. We're going from healthy microbes to diagnose unhealthy ones in humans. So
Yep.
if you're coughing up sputum, or if you have an infected bladder and you give your doctor a sample, they can spread it out on our little blood agar plate and incubate it, and the bacteria that are causing the issue, it can grow in their little colonies, and they can look at it and they might be different color, or they might make the blood go clear or green tinge around the little colony, and can they can get those bacteria and grow them in a broth, so they can get enough to get DNA to test it or whatever. But it's disease diagnosis at the far end of the healthy soil microbes. I think that's pretty cool.
And you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that you are also beginning to produce antibodies. And this is, I think, an area that everyone should be interested in, or at least it's an area that I'm very interested in because, um, there's some fascinating research. It was, oh, I want to say it was published back in the early 1900s, 20s, 30s, maybe 40s. I couldn't say exactly when, on this idea of producing immunotherapy quality milk, or rather, I think it might have been called super immune milk, where the idea was that if an individual, if a human is diseased, um, they can pull a blood sample with that microorganism and inject it into a cow, and then harvest a dry cow that's 6 to 8 weeks away from giving birth. Then collect that colostrum and collect the milk, and the cow will produce antibodies that we
Mm.
can then consume. And I know Jerry Bernetti treated his first case of cancer successfully with this as a therapy. And so I've always been intrigued by how our bodies produce antibodies, how mammals in general produce antibodies, and how we might think about that as the foundations of our immune system and supporting that a bit better. So, yeah, I'd love to get your perspective on what is involved in producing antibodies.
Well, really, all you're doing is immunizing them with a protein of interest. Uh, so it might be we have made antibodies for a company that checks whether a meat being sold into a supermarket is what it says it is. So that they got us to make they would send us the protein that they were looking for, and we would inject it into our horses over a period until they built up enough antibodies to be worth collecting. When we would send that back to them, they could use those antibodies to cross check. So if someone was selling what they said was beefsteak, but they could check whether it was actually beefsteak or whether it was actually camel or something else. So they're really, or if we inject snake venom into a horse, tiny quantity, increasing it over a 3-month period until it's actually enough that if I injected it into myself unwittingly while I was doing the process, I would not have long to get to a doctor. They're just continually making antibodies to fight that foreign protein, and so that when you collect a big amount of plasma out of those horses, you can concentrate it down so that you've got a high concentration of the antibodies that will fight whatever the snake venom is you put in. Um, and I think a horse is just a big factory, really, in terms of producing a lot of it at a time. You could probably do it in a chook egg, or like you
Right.
say, in
Right.
a cow's milk, but you take a long time to get the same amount of
Yeah.
um, antibodies, and especially if you have to do it with a cow that's not long which is like close to calving to get that
Right.
to come out.
Yeah, it's a very narrow window of opportunity for sure.
So I don't know how we could use uh, plasma that we take from our horses personally if we needed to for
Yeah.
snakes.
No. Yeah.
It would be too dilute, but um,
So
and it
how are those antibodies being used then that you are producing?
it's for a different company and they use it for the pet market. So it would be sold to vets around Australia, I guess. Um, we're not involved in any of that, the sale of that, but it's for, yeah, probably cats and dogs that get bitten by snakes,
Yeah.
I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's an interesting. It adds another interesting aspect to what we're doing because collecting blood every week's uh, it's the same old thing every time, but having the added danger of some venom. It makes it, and then also when you collect the blood from those horses, it's such a high value product that everything has to go right, so it can be quite stressful. Uh, be like having a really good crop and a hailstorm's on the way. It's yeah, you really, it's you'd be
A lot
on
of
the edge
pressure
of
in
your
the
seat.
moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, Gavin, what topics have we not yet talked about?
uh, well, I mean, I think uh, in terms of the blood business, probably not a lot. And look, I'm not the best uh, time control grazer around. You've talked to a lot of better people than me who would have advice. I've got lots of tricks up my sleeve for managing this group of horses, and uh, I probably should write it down properly so that. And I need to be training my people better to do it, so I'm not the one who can do it. I think you've got a pretty good overview of what we do in terms of the horses. One of the things we also try and do is, and our grazing supports this, is not use uh, internal parasite drench or any other chemicals on them. We're endeavouring to be um, totally organic in the way we do it. We're not certified or anything. It wouldn't make any sense. But we use diatomaceous earth and in a tub with salt leading up to the full moon to try and strip intestinal worms out of them. Um, at the moment, I haven't been doing that, but it's supposed to be part of my program. We use uh, chelated minerals in a liquid form in a dispenser in the trough to give more minerals to them. And I noticed that when I do that, they actually put. Uh, it was a real light bulb moment for me when I had horses. You could see their ribs, and it was dry standing grass. And we started using this liquid minerals in the trough, and over a few months, the grass didn't change, but they got a cover over their ribs, a cover of fat over their ribs, which could only be attributed to the minerals that we were putting in the trough. And the reason we put it in the trough was that if we put out um, a loose lick like that they could eat out of a tub, then all the shy feeders didn't get it because they got bullied away. So even we used to put out a few tubs, one, a third of the way out from the trough, another one right up the other end of the paddock, that not everyone would get it, but everyone has to get a drink. So they would get it in there. Um, they would get it in the water, and it made a massive difference.
So this is I'm fascinated by this. So you're describing you're adding minerals or vitamins perhaps, electrolytes perhaps, but you're not adding things that necessarily contain energy, right?
No, no, I never do. The only time we have done that is leading up to 2019. We would trail out barley on the ground or oats. That was an energy source. I don't think it did much, and it wasn't until we actually had them in a confined space and were feeding them the proper horse pellets and good lucerne or alfalfa hay, and also oaten hay, that they got the energy requirements that they really needed. Out in the paddock, we're always tracking the average weight and the average red blood percentage of each of the three groups. And you can see as it gets drier, things just start to slowly slip. And then when the feed freshens up it comes again. But usually we don't need to give them energy. Um,
Yeah, so this is interesting. How do you explain for an animal that you're providing a supplement that doesn't contain energy, but it's improving energy conversion?
well, I think if I did an analysis of the soil, you'd be finding. I know it's certainly sulfur and phosphorus deficient in pretty big ways. Um, I'm not. You'd be all over the details of what each one can do, but I know that phosphorus has a fair part to play in energy. Um, Maybe that the liquid is adding some of that in. I I haven't really nutted it through. Is the full answer? Um,
Well, Gavin, I'm fascinated by this because I very well understand that when you give plants a proper nutritional balance, then that allows them to create more energy through photosynthesis. But in the case of livestock, or in this case, horses, they're not actually creating more energy. They're just simply converting that energy much more efficiently, apparently. That is in the forage, that is in the grasses, that they're getting more energy out because
so
of the
the
minerals.
Yeah, well,
And
that's what it seems to do. I mean, the energy's in that dry grass. If you put a match in it, there's plenty of energy in there. So there, uh, yeah, I think. I mean, horses seem to have a lot more fungal activity in their intestines than maybe cattle do. I don't know what the research into cattle microbiome is in terms of fungal content, but I know that obviously they're obviously very bacterially dominant. But I think horses have a higher fungal uh, presence, and we have had a girl doing a PhD who's it hasn't finished yet, but she was taking samples of some of our horses' dung and culturing and sequencing the fungal species. I'm really quite interested to see what they discover, but it like maybe that's part of it. I mean, maybe they're able to break down and release energy in a different way than what a ruminant can um, in their own stomachs. Yeah, I
well, I think while the digestive process is different in the sense that it's not a ruminant, we do know that it's still very dependent on the microbiome, and the microbes that constitute that microbiome still require all of these minerals as enzyme cofactors, because the reality is their digestion and the metabolic breakdown, the enzymatic breakdown of these products, or of these foodstuffs, is still all fundamentally, it's still all an enzymatic process, and it all requires these enzyme cofactors of molybdenum and selenium and sulfur and magnesium, and on the list goes. So I suppose I shouldn't be so surprised by significant energy gains um, from minerals. And it might also explain why, um, when we have high mineral content forages, they are they they consistently show much more feed value. We see this a lot in dairies where they calculate the energy levels, and there's so much milk production per ton. But when the mineral levels come up, all of a sudden they overproduce. There's more milk production per ton of forage than might be accounted for purely by the energy levels alone.
yeah. So they actually need to eat less to do the
Right.
same,
Exactly.
which which I think you would. And I mean, maybe that's part of why when you get a good grazing management system going, your stocking rate increases because everyone's eating. Well, you'd be growing more feed, but also if the nutrient density of the plants are higher, everyone eats a bit less, then you've got more for more mouths. I'm assuming that's partly how some of those stocking rate increases would occur.
Well, it's been a common observation, or yeah, I would say a frequent observation, that when grazers are trying to renovate pastures and they graze them very hard, graze the grasses very hard, then they get this rebound, this flourishing of forbs, of weeds, of broadleaves. And when you look at it visually, it appears that the biomass that is present is less than it was previously with the grasses. And yet, particularly often in the first year, productivity might be down a little bit, but usually by the second year and thereon, um, the the meat and the milk productivity per acre is actually higher, even though the biomass appears to be less. It's a very common phenomena.
Yeah. I, I I'm still trying to work out some of that stuff. I like really taking stuff back really hard um, is is difficult for us because we either get thistles instead of just
Right. Well, you're dealing
soft
with a
sort of
different
ones.
animal. You have to manage it a little bit differently as well.
Yeah, I think cattle can take it back harder
Yeah.
with a different effect. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I completely agree.
and it is true. Horses will eat things differently to cattle. They will eat a lot rougher grasses that cattle won't even touch unless there's nothing else. They won't eat medics or clovers in the winter. They could leave it a foot tall and not be worried about it. But that is ice cream to the cows. And actually, what we will try and do is have horses and cattle going over the same country in a year, giving their different benefits. I think
Yeah.
the benefits that a ruminant brings um, will, uh, will certainly add to whatever a horse can give, and
Yeah.
add in a much bigger way than a horse could do it. Yeah.
Well, Gavin, this has been a very enjoyable conversation. Thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for being here, for being willing to share your experiences and wisdom. I've greatly enjoyed it, and I look forward to having more discussions with you again in the future.
Thank you, John. It's been a pleasure.
The team at AEA and I are dedicated to bringing this show to you because we believe that knowledge and information is the foundation of successful regenerative systems. At AEA, we believe that growing better quality food and making more money from your crops is possible. And since 2006, we've worked with leading professional growers to help them do just that. At AEA, we don't guess, we test, we analyze, and we provide recommendations based on scientific data, knowledge, and experience. We've developed products that are uniquely positioned to help growers make more money with regenerative agriculture. If you are a professional grower who believes in testing instead of guessing, someone who believes in a better, more regenerative way to grow, visit advancingecoag.com and contact us to see if AEA is right for you.